Throughout my life, I've had odd things happen to me. Not so much as, say, some of my family. We never doubted the existence of ghosts, but my mother never encouraged us to think of it much. She believed that dwelling on it could make it worse. I agree, but my sister and I loved discussing it, even to this day. When I was 12, we moved into a new house, out in the woods. It was a double-wide trailer, but not bad for a trailer. We knew that spirits could be tied to objects or houses, but we just had no idea that they would stick around with the land. Not long after we moved into the house, my brother started fussing about his door being opened and closed many times during the night. Since he wasn't all that worried about it, and the rest of the family didn't think much about it, I soon forgot. It was the middle of the summer in 1994 when something first happened to my sister and me. We used to play with our toy ponies daily. That day, her friend, Darlana, came over, and we spent hours coming with new plots to take our ponies through. That night, we decided to leave our ponies out on the coffee table, all doing something to go along with our stories. We placed the ponies who were lovers in what looked like a kissing pose or close embraces. Some were looking away from one another because they didn't like each other, etc. And we went to bed. The next morning, as we settled down to start playing, we noticed a very big change. All the ponies had been moved. The funny part was that the ponies that hated each other went from facing different directions to kissing. I don't remember too much more about the change, but it all had humorous quality. It was as if whoever changed them had been listening intently to us playing and knew who was who of our collection. We immediately decided it was our older brother who hated our ponies, and we immediately assailed him with accusations. He flat out refused it all, stating that he would never even want to touch one of them. This sounded about right to me. After all, he would never have known which pony was who or what. The closest we had come to knowing who any of them were was the time he almost wrenched off one's head. My mother was also totally out of the picture as far as suspects go. She never paid attention to the stories we made up about them. She was also not the type to ever do anything like that. It just wasn't in her character in the slightest. Now that there was no one else to ask, my sister and her friend claimed it must have been our brother. I myself was doubtful. After a few hours of discussing the matter, they finally sided with me that it must have been something completely different. We buzzed with the thoughts that it might be a ghost and left them out more nights. The second morning of trying this, we had a couple of changes, but it never really happened again. Many strange things transpired in that house over time, but I think that one was my favorite. It felt like having an audience to our stories. I never felt anything really mean-spirited in that house, though there were times I was scared almost pantsless, but it always turned out to be funny in the end. I am still convinced to this day that all we had, and still have to this day, was a spirit with a good sense of humor. I have shared some of my stories several years ago on another, less entertaining and far less professional site. In case they seem familiar to anybody, please allow me to point out that some of my stories are also included in a children's book I am in the process of trying to get published. But there are no establishments in these stories. I am telling them just as I remember them. When I was a kid, we would have a huge family reunion in the Ozark Mountains of northwest Arkansas every year. This is something we looked forward to all year since some of our favorite cousins would be there. As we got older, my middle sister and I would bring friends with us. One thing we always had fun doing was visiting a local cemetery that dated back to the Civil War. Beside the cemetery was an old church that had also been used as a schoolhouse. It was very old and most of the windows were boarded up. Of course, we had to check it out. We had always been curious, but had never in all these years attempted to go inside. Now, for you to understand the story, you have to understand the layout of the church house. It was wide, with a breezeway running between the front and back doors. As one enters the back doors, on the left-hand side is a sanctuary that runs the full length of the breezeway, with 2 or 3 sets of doors leading in. On the right-hand side, there are several rooms that were once used as classrooms, I assume. Each room had a door that led to the breezeway, but they were also all interconnected, meaning you could walk from one room to the next without having to go back into the breezeway. Anyway, we entered and looked around. Even though it was bright and sunny outside, it was pitch black inside due to the boarded up windows. Now, you have to understand that there were about 10 of us, and we were a little leery of the old floor, as it was giving way in some places. We slowly made our way to the sanctuary, laughing and scaring each other. The floor was littered with beer cans and junk food wrappers, obviously left from some kids having a party. There was also graffiti on the walls. We kind of split up and began to explore, and one of my cousins hollered out for us to come here, so we went into the one classroom. There was a little bit of light in this room because a small piece of the board had been removed from one of the windows. Someone pointed out how much cooler it was in the one corner of the room, and we all started kind of playing around and walking through the cold spot, getting goosebumps. When I looked up and screamed, I saw a dismembered head floating in mid-air. Everyone screamed and then started laughing. The head had actually belonged to one of my friends, and it wasn't dismembered at all. He was just standing in the next room looking at us through the hole in the wall. After we settled down, we really got to checking out the whole cold spot thing, and we got a little freaked out, and we started thinking we could hear things. Finally, we decided to leave and we went back out the way we came in. As we were coming around the building, someone hollered for the rest of us to look, and in the window, at the bottom corner, was movement. This was the same window in the room with the cold spot. We looked as a small pale hand seemed to be waving, friendly-like. And we all were positive that just beyond that hand we could make out a tiny, equally pale face smiling out at us. Needless to say, we took off pretty quick. I also have a good story about the cemetery that was next to the church, but I'll save that for another time. Several years ago, we were back in the area and I wanted to take my kids to see the cemetery and old church house, since they never had been there. It was just as I remember it, except a little more run down and rotted over the years. We also took some younger cousins and my baby sister who had been too young the last time. It was broad daylight, a lot of the windows were missing, so it was much brighter and not as scary. We also did not get into investigating very much because the floor was very rotten. One funny thing did happen though. My cousin Heather put a hand to her head and said, ominously, "I sense someone named Dan has been here." My cousin Shay said, "Oh, whoa, how did you know that?" My husband said, pointing at some graffiti behind Shay. "Because it says so right there." We all busted out laughing when we saw the spray-painted message Dan was here. Upon returning last summer, we were very excited to see the old church had undergone some renovation. Most of the floor was replaced, so we were able to carry on this 20-plus year tradition of the whole new generation visiting this old church house. Cherished memories. Sorry this was so long. Thanks for hanging in there. My story takes place in a small town in central Arkansas. During the summer of 2012, I was hanging out with a couple of my friends in town. The date was very uneventful and boring, and my friends and I don't handle boring very well. We decided to hop in my truck and go for a drive and see if we could find a party or something going on that evening. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we decided to drive around. We drove around town for the better part of an hour. Found absolutely nothing to do, so we thought it would be a good idea to start checking out the surrounding towns in the county. The closest town was Valonia, so we went there first. Once we got there, I immediately drove towards the outskirts, where it was more likely to find a social gathering of some sort. After a little more driving around, we decided to give it a rest and call it a day. On the way back through, one of my companions told me to stop the vehicle because he thought he'd seen something of interest. Wanting more than anything to have something entertaining to do, I complied. I stopped, turned around, and drove slowly until my friend pointed out what he had seen. I pulled off the shoulder, and the three of us exited the vehicle to see a narrow, almost unnoticeable foot trail, no wider than 2.5 feet wide. I looked at my friends, and then they looked back at me with intrigue and curiosity in their eyes. We talked about it for a few minutes, debating whether or not the trail was private property or not. In the end, we decided to see where the trail led anyway. It was around 6 or 7 in the afternoon by the time we reached the end of the trail, and at the end, in a clearing sat an old, structurally unsound looking cabin. I got a weird vibe from this place as soon as I saw it. My friends, on the other hand, were all about going inside and looking around. I objected to doing that immediately by saying, "What if someone lives here?" But to my dismay, both my friends pointed out that there was no door. It was fallen to the ground in front of the cabin as if it had been removed and left to the elements. Once inside, all I can smell was dirt and mold and other earthy smells. We all discovered that the cabin was bigger than it looked on the outside. There were 4 rooms, a front room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. Also, it wasn't empty. The whole cabin had furniture and personal effects. If everything hadn't been covered in dirt, dust, and other things, you would think that somebody did in fact still live here. Given this, we each decided to check out a different room. Darren took the front room, Zach took the kitchen, and I took the bedroom. The bedroom, like the rest of the cabin, wasn't all that outstanding. In fact, it was very quaint, as one would expect from a cabin. I got to looking around the room, picking things up and examining them. I looked around for maybe 5 minutes, then I noticed a change in the air. Suddenly, the air in the room felt thick and heavy, and I found it harder to breathe. At first, I thought I was getting sick or something, but then I felt it. Someone behind me, right over my shoulder. I can feel hot breath running down the back of my neck, and I could hear breathing. I turned around, but no one was there. But I could still feel that eerie, unsettling pressure. No sooner than I had turned around, I was joined by Zach and Darren, who asked me if I felt something like a heavy weight on my shoulders. I told them I had. I was about to tell them whatever it was that had been standing behind me when what was probably the most terrifying thing in my life happened to me. The pressure returned, and I felt my feet leave the ground. The next thing I knew, I was flying through the air and crashing through a mostly intact window. The combined impact of the window and hitting the ground knocked the wind out of me. I was conscious for a few more seconds, then I blacked out. I wish to this day that I could blame what happened to me on my friends, but how can I? How can I blame someone for throwing me out of a window when neither of them were standing within arm's reach of me? I had no way of explaining this phenomenon other than that it had to be an angry spirit of some kind. Maybe it didn't like me going through that bedroom, or maybe it didn't want any of us in that cabin. I don't know. But I did go back to where Darren found that trail a few weeks later. Against my better judgment, I started down the trail to the cabin. But when I got there, the cabin wasn't there. It was as if the cabin had never existed. There was no evidence that anything had ever been there. And I am positive it wasn't a vivid dream or anything like that, because my friends remember it. I haven't had any paranormal or supernatural encounters since, and I hope I never do. As a child, I didn't really ever have experiences with anything paranormal. That is, until I was 12 years old. I totally brought this upon myself, and I've been living with the consequences ever since. I grew up in a relatively devout Catholic family and always believed in God. I never had tried to dabble in anything like this previously. Quite the contrary, I always knew better than to mess with anything of the occult. Why I did what I did that morning, I will never know, except to say that I was a young child that had a momentary lapse in judgment. Okay, so here's the story. When I was 12, my parents decided to take a week-long trip to Spain, and I was left to stay with my grandfather, who lived way out in the country on a 1,500-acre farm. Not that I think this had anything to do with what happened, but the house was very old and creepy. One morning, I woke up very early before the sun had even come up. In the room I was staying in, there were blackout shades, so even during the day, the room stayed almost completely dark when the shade was drawn. As I was lying there awake, I started thinking about this episode of The Twilight Zone I had seen, where a terminally ill man was confronted by the devil and traded his soul for 1,000 years of life, and he couldn't die, etc. Well, my 12-year-old self started thinking, There's a lot of cool things that I wanted, and maybe I can try to see what would happen if I attempted such an endeavor. I really didn't know how to go about it, so I sat up in my bed and started talking out loud. I said, I will trade you this and that in exchange for my soul. Well, I sat there and nothing happened. I waited, nothing. Well, that settles that, I thought, feeling pretty stupid, so I laid back down and started to doze off. I was at the point right before you fall asleep when I felt something grab the back of my neck hard. I bolted up, startled, and looked around. Nothing. Well, I thought, maybe I had actually made it to sleep and I just dreamed it. This didn't really frighten me too much, and I laid back down. This time I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for, but I didn't think it was too long. All I know is that I was asleep and then bam, I was instantly wide awake. Standing over me was a giant shadow being, and there was some force holding me to the bed. I was unable to move or scream during this whole experience, which I think lasted about 15 seconds. Since I couldn't do anything else, I closed my eyes in terror. This is when the moan scream happened. I heard this not with my ears, but it was in my head. It started as a long, low moan and transitioned itself into this blood-curdling scream. Words do not do this noise justice. It was so far from anything human. I can only imagine it's what is heard in hell. By this point, I was so scared that the only reason I didn't have a heart attack was I was a healthy 12-year-old at the time. Finally, I was able to open my mouth and word, stop. And as soon as I did, everything ceased. I was trembling so hard that I thought for a second that someone was actually shaking the bed. I have never prayed so hard or with so much conviction in my life. I stayed where I was probably for a full 5 minutes, praying, simply because I was too scared to get up out of bed and go to the door. Finally, I summoned up the courage and basically smacked through the door. While this was the worst of my experiences, it certainly was not the only one. For years, to this day, I would be visited by this force that would come and hold me down on my bed, unable to move or scream. It seemed to happen less frequently as the years went by, and rarely happens anymore, which brings me to another point that I would like to touch on. In reading some other stories on here, people talk about the sleep paralysis, and some of the responses people give is that it's a matter of simple sleep paralysis. I know for a fact that what happened to me is no natural occurrence because it would happen quite often while I was awake. I could feel the presence of something on certain nights and know that it was going to happen. I would lie there in the dark, scared and alone, and wait. It would always start as a tingle that started at the base of my spine and worked its way up. When it reached my neck and head, I would instantly be held to the bed. I learned a while after that I could tense up whenever I felt the sensation start, and I can hold it down to the base of my spine. But inevitably, I couldn't do it all night, and out of exhaustion, I would give in. Although I never saw the shadow figure again, I would from time to time experience extremely loud buzzing sounds or an intense instant feeling of extreme panic. I would have nightmares that were like no other dreams I had ever had. They were so vivid and real and entirely evil. I know in my heart that they were associated with the terror that I brought upon myself. Needless to say, I was fairly traumatized by this throughout my teenage years. Something that always made me wonder since this happened is, why didn't God protect me from these repeated attacks? Certainly, these experiences had brought me closer to God. I prayed to Him constantly at night for protection, and it never seemed to do any good. I would call into the darkness, rebunking it in the name of Jesus to no avail. Some might say I am forever damned for what I did, and that the reason I am beyond protection was that I placed myself entirely into Satan's power. But I do not believe this. Am I forever held accountable for the sin that I committed as a child? No. God's power and forgiveness saves all, and nothing is above that. I have made my peace with what I have done and lived with the consequences. Hopefully my torment has been my penance. I would love to hear about any questions or comments on this because I get so little constructive feedback. I hope my story helps people believe that there is a battle between good and evil out there, and it helps people believe. Last weekend, me, my husband, my brother, and his girlfriend stayed for 2 nights in the Crescent Hotel in Eureka Springs, Arkansas. We booked room 101, which was Norman Baker's office when he ran a cancer hospital. The first night, we stayed up really late and nothing happened in our room. We started to explore the hotel around 3:30 a.m. We went and took pictures in front of the doors of some of the rooms we heard were haunted. I also took tons of pictures in the hallways. I was catching orbs, but I wanted something more. I stood in front of 218 for about 45 minutes. Room 218 was supposed to be haunted by a ghost named Michael. The whole time I was standing there, I was talking to Michael, asking him to show me something or play a joke or trick on me. I didn't experience anything, although my brother and husband were catching a lot of green orbs around me. We went back to the room disappointed. Then something strange happened. I was getting into bed, and a deck of cards that was on the coffee table when we left was now under my pillow. I knew that someone could have been playing a trick on me, so I brushed it off, put the cards back on the coffee table in the other room, and went to bed. The next day, the 4 of us had a late start, so we refused the maid service and went shopping downtown. We were thinking nothing of the deck of cards under my pillow until we came back into the room, and the deck of cards had been dealt into 4 hands on the coffee table. We were all together downtown the entire time, and we didn't have maid service that day. The only reasonable explanation is that the hotel staff was messing with us. The problem with that idea is that the hotel makes a lot of money off the idea that they are one of the most haunted hotels in the United States, and it would be a huge liability for them to try to fake it with their guests. At this point, we were a little spooked and skeptical. The 4 of us sat in the living room, discussing the possible ways this could have happened. While talking about it all, I kept saying out loud if there were any ghosts there with us that I would like them to show us something. I said I just felt like one of the people with me was playing a joke. Also, while talking, my brother's girlfriend was rearranging the cards to put them back in the case, so that if they were moved around in the case, we would know. She put 1 joker on top and 1 joker on bottom. She put the deck of cards in the case back in the middle of the table. My husband was convinced it was the hotel staff, so he booby-trapped the front door with an empty bottle of vodka. If someone didn't know that the bottle was there, they'd knock it over when they opened the door. We took tons of pictures so we can know if the bottle had been moved. That night, we went out for dinner and drinks. A few hours later, around 11 p.m., we got back to the room. My husband unlocked the door slowly and reached his hand just around to take a ton of pictures before disturbing the bottle. What we saw was insane to us all. And still, a few days later, we're trying to find out a logical explanation. There was a row of cards spread out in front of the door face down with 2 jokers face up, while the rest of the cards were still in the case on the coffee table. No one had disturbed the vodka bottle. That night, we all wanted more proof. We wanted something to happen while we were in the room, but nothing did. That morning, my husband woke up even more skeptical since nothing happened when he was in the room. I was the last person in the bathroom before my husband went to take a shower, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. While he was in the shower, my brother, his girlfriend, and I went to breakfast. My husband met us down for breakfast about 30 minutes later and was a little upset that we were messing with him. He was accusing us of writing something on the mirror before we left the room. We didn't. The word save was written on the mirror with a soap-like texture while my husband was in the shower. We all can't figure out how this happened and don't know the significance behind the word save. I don't know if Michael was playing that joke on me that I had asked him for, or if Norman Baker used to play cards in the parlor of his office. I would love to hear if anyone else has stayed in room 101 and or had experienced anything similar in the Crescent Hotel. You ghouls seem to really like these state-specific videos, and I'm really glad you do, because honestly, I thought these would be a big old flop. But they're not. You guys really enjoy them, and I'm really happy for that. Did you guys notice anything different about maybe my sound quality? Because I got a blue snowball, and it has an adorable ass pink pop filter, which you have seen if you follow me on Twitter or on Snapchat or Facebook. Did I post this on Facebook? I don't remember, but it might be there. It's so cute and girly. I wanted the pink snowball, but it's literally like $80 more expensive than like a regular color snowball. So I had to go and get a boring black one, because my husband wouldn't let me spend $80 extra on one just because it was hot pink. Also, did you notice, because I just noticed, that I now have over 600 subscribers, and that is insane. Like, I was just at 500 last week. You ghouls, you're like whoring me out or something. Something's going on. And I appreciate it, which means 400 more subscribers and I will do a face reveal. Let's get to that face reveal, ghouls, because I want to send funny ass Snapchats with my face with those filters, because they are hilarious. But I can't because I didn't do my face reveal yet. Maybe I'll do a face reveal on Snapchat earlier, because I only have like 10 people on Snapchat who follow me. So you might get a sneaky peeky of what I look like if you care at all about that. And this is getting really long. So yeah, let's see. Last video is on the top left. Next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen. They're also in the description. The secret word is gonna be microphone, because I just got a new one. So type in microphone in the comments. And I really like seeing how you guys put the secret word in sentences. I really hope like the people who just scroll down and look at the comments are like, what the fuck are these people talking about? Chocolate and closets? What's going on? I really hope that they are confused. And I really, really appreciate, I'm so surprised actually, of how many of you get to the back of these, like all the way back. Like, do you guys actually enjoy me? Should I do like just like random talking videos? That would be fun. If you like that, let me know. Remember, there's always someone or something watching you.